Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here at the Spy Museum, which is such a fantastic facility. It's just my experience in just going through when I was researching this book and being a tourist here was fantastic. And I was first introduced to it by a man here I want to introduce is Ray Batvinis, who's a friend of the museum. I know he's a former FBI special agent and now a university professor and author who was a very helpful source for me in writing this book. He had previously investigated. He wrote a book, a very important book on the origins of FBI counterintelligence, which those who want to know more about how the FBI became the counterintelligence agency that it became as it went into World War II and beyond should check out Ray's work. I have two other special guests that I will introduce during the course of the talk with their permission, who are intimately connected to the story. But my story can begin in a lot of places, this story of Bill Sebold and what was known as the Duquesne spy ring. I'll begin in early 1939 when William Gottlieb Sebold, he boarded the SS Deutschland passenger liner at the West Side Piers in Manhattan and sailed for a Nazi Germany that was preparing for war. And he was carrying a single suitcase and a package. He left behind his wife in their East 84th Street apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And his plan was to visit his mother in his birthplace of Mülheim in the Ruhr Valley in Germany and recover from an ulcer surgery that he had recently undergone. And when he arrived at passport control in Hamburg, he was taken aside by Nazi officials in plain clothes who questioned him about his life in the United States. After learning that he had once worked at the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation of San Diego, which produced U.S. Navy seaplanes, the men promised ominously that Sebold would hear from them again. Now, up to this point in his life, Sebold had lived a wayward existence. He was a mechanical draftsman, apprenticed as a teenager, and served from age 17 to 19 in the German army, spending 8 months in the trenches in the Somme district during World War I. And turned off by the unrest of the post-war years in Germany, he took to the sea in 1922, serving as a junior engineer on an oil company vessel before jumping ship at the first stop, which was Galveston, Texas. And an illegal immigrant, he worked for a year in rural Texas, including for a time as a mule tender on a ranch, before returning to Mülheim to help his parents through economic difficulties. A year later, he returned to sea, this time jumping ship in South America, where he spent 2 years working as a bartender and later as a diesel engineer in Chile and Peru. And on February 13th, 1929, he entered America, legally under the quota system for German immigrants. And over the next 2 years, he traversed the nation, working for various industrial outfits in Oakland, Fairbanks, Alaska, San Francisco, Milwaukee, Erie, finally arriving in New York, where he married a German native who worked as a live-in maid for a wealthy family on Park Avenue. And they made a residence in the Yorkville neighborhood, which was a very German neighborhood, the German neighborhood, really, of New York, a real center of German life, including, after the rise of Hitler, Nazi supporters, the most public of which were the goose-stepping members of the German-American Bund, who very famously had a rally in Madison Square Garden, filled Madison Square Garden with Hitler supporters in 1939. Sebold, however, took very seriously the oath he made on February 10th, 1936, when he became an American citizen and pledged that I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty. I had nothing to do with Hitler anymore, he later said. I was an American citizen. And so when he was contacted by regime officials, as promised, several months after arriving in his mother's home, Sebold initially refused the startling offer to go to the United States as an agent for the Abwehr, the German military espionage service. Go there yourself, he told the man, but Dr. Gassner, as the man introduced himself, proceeded to threaten Sebold, describing the clothes he would be wearing when he was laid out in his casket. In fear for his life, Sebold asked for the month of August to think over the plan. That's the month of August 1939, perhaps the most momentous month in world history, debatable, but it's up there. On August 23rd, the Hitler-Stalin Pact was announced, which gave Hitler the opportunity to invade Poland without worry of interference from the great power to the east. And on September 1st, the same day that Hitler launched the Blitzkrieg against Poland, commencing World War II, Sebold decided to leave Germany. He went to the American consulate in Cologne seeking help, and he was told by a consular clerk to make a run for the border. He flagged down 2 motorists with foreign license plates who refused to help, fearful that he was being followed by the Gestapo, and mindful that he lacked proper papers to get past the checkpoints. Sebold gave in. He wrote a letter to Dr. Gassner saying he accepted his proposition 100%. In time, Dr. Gassner introduced Sebold to Dr. Renken, which was one of the many aliases for Nicholas Adolf Fritz Ritter, Nicholas Ritter, an English-fluent Abwehr officer based in Hamburg. And today we have Nicholas Ritter's daughter, who, Catherine Wallace, who is in the second row here. Just to fill in slightly who she is and how she came into the story, Catherine was a young girl during the war. Ritter, who had lived in the United States in the 1920s, had married an Alabama-born woman who he took with him to Germany. They had 2 children, one of whom was Catherine. And by the time that Ritter met Sebold and brought him into the spy service, they were already going through a divorce. And Catherine was a young girl who has an extraordinary wartime story that she's written about in her own memoir, which involves a divorce and a custody battle, kind of like Kramer versus Kramer melded with Inglourious Basterds, I don't know. But it is quite a story. And she, after the war, came to the United States and currently lives in the Washington, D.C. area and speaks not with a German accent, but with a thick syrup of the South. And I don't know how thick, it's quite melodious. But to get back to the story, and she was a great help in this book and a real peach of a lady. Ritter was looking for, at this point in the story, Ritter was looking for a man who he could send to New York as a messenger and a contact man for a small ring of spies he had already established here. And Sebold was nominated for the job. But Nicholas Ritter's great mistake, the strategic blunder that would lead to the spectacular downfall of his American spy ring, occurred on the very day he met his newest agent. Apparently under Ritter's orders, Sebold's US passport was stolen. Likely so an agent who didn't have the travel advantage of legitimate US citizenship could use it. Ritter then instructed Sebold to go to the US consulate in Cologne, the same place where Sebold had already attempted to tell his story, and apply for a new passport through legitimate channels. The passport reapplication process required Sebold to visit the consulate several times over the coming weeks, a period when the excitement of the early days of the war had subsided. And Sebold was able to tell his story, providing letters from Ritter as backup to the Consul General himself, Alfred W. Clyforth. In a cable to Washington, Clyforth informed his superiors that Sebold was being coerced into the German spy service and that, quote, he requests that he be met upon his arrival in New York by representatives of the State Department in order to convey his story to them by word of mouth. Later, he told them to include the FBI. G-men is what he told them. I want to see the G-men. Sebold underwent a total of 10 days of training in Hamburg. He was lodged at the Pension Klopstock, which was populated by other trainee spies. He was taught how to use a radio key to tap out messages via Morse code, instructed in the use of a specially outfitted Leica camera to reproduce blueprints or documents onto a postage stamp size microphotograph, which would be readable only with a magnifying instrument. and he was schooled in a cipher system based upon the letter arrangement